The culmination of the preseason is upon us. What can the Chiefs do? And who has to make plays to make this roster? The final positions are up for grabs. We're going to get into the preview today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. It's the final preseason game. I know you're pumped, and so are we. We have a lot to go over today, but we're brought to you by BriteCo. This episode and a bunch of others, they are the jewelry and watch insurance company that you got to check out. They bring comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5. BriteCo.co/locked on is where you want to go check that out. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, as well as RGR Football and NFL 33. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the podcast network, your team every day for free. Oh, Chris, where do we start?
Now you can breathe. And my name is Chris Clark. You can find me over at Chiefs Corner. Going to be talking about who needs to make a push for this roster and who is fighting for a position. That's what we're going to be looking at today. And then we're going to be talking, after this game's over, we're going to give you our review of the game and then got to get into who we think is going to make the 53-man roster. I mean, that's really what it's going to come down to after this game.
Yeah, I will have my 53-man out on NFL33.com probably Sunday evening or Monday.
And I do want to take a second to say rest in peace, Lynn Dawson. I want to say that.
I put it on Twitter this morning. There's no better way to say this other than, the early Super Bowls when the league was fledgling and maybe some people were watching and it was still trying to gain its traction. Lynn Dawson was one of one. He is the guy that was the best at his game at the time. And I think he just went on to do even better things and brought a whole second generation into it. So rip Mr. Dawson.
Yeah, a lot of people sad today, and I get it. He really brought a lot of people on. I mean, after his playing days with all of his broadcasting and one of three people to be a player and a broadcaster in the Hall of Fame for both. That's impressive. And from everything I've read and everything I've heard, he seemed like a really cool guy. And so rest in peace, Lenny. And I hope that you were enjoying things up in heaven.
I hope I can work until I'm in my 80s. That'd be kind of fun.
Right.
And by the way, Chiefs, if you need somebody to call again, just let me know.
I would also say, to be fair, work and love what you do, because I guarantee you he loved what he did. Yeah. I don't know that you want to do your day job until you're 80, but maybe you do.
Maybe. We'll see. I don't know if we're going that far, but hey. For me, this game is about the culmination of the preseason, of the offseason, everything from the day that they got knocked out of that possible championship run. It all comes down to this. And I think that what a lot of people forget, and sometimes even the coaches, is that now that season and all that work depends on having your guys available. So I want one series at most for Kels and Mahomes and all the skill guys. Yes, I know the linemen can probably get by with a little bit more than that. I probably wouldn't do that either. Just get the starters out after a series so they can knock the rust off. And it is kind of a longer period until they play week one versus years past. So I do think there is a viable argument to say your starter should play, at least get on the field, although a lot of teams are resting their quarterbacks, including the Buffalo Bills. Where do you stand?
I expect that Mahomes is going to play a little bit. I don't know that he'll play much more than just one drive. I think that would be what I would expect him to do. It does look like he could be without Juju. He could be without MVS. They made some roster cuts yesterday, and I know it wasn't on the show, but really kind of surprised at the Derek Gore situation, although maybe that's a way that they can keep him around another year if they're willing to pay him and he's willing to stick around on IR. But the interesting thing on that is a fractured thumb. You'd think he'd only be out maybe a month and a half.
That was my thought as well. And so what that said to me is, okay, you can put him on IR, you can release him from IR and bring him right back to the practice squad. There's a number of maneuvers that they can make once everybody else's roster is kind of settled and you run less of a risk of losing him.
Yeah. And this is also one of those mysterious injury type things that Kansas City has done over the past couple of years. So wouldn't shock me for him just to sit on IR all year long as well.
Yeah.
You look at the rest of this, though. Lucas Niang going to the PUP list. I'm glad that they made that available for this cut down day because I think that was a smart move on the league's part, give them the ability to move people like that already. Niang goes to PUP, and really that brings into question a lot of the different tackle positions and who could be that swing guy. I still think we're both on the same page that They're going to keep the guy that they drafted in Kennard, but I don't think he's ready to play. And so that gives you a big question of who's going to be that third guy.
Yeah, that is the question. It comes down to Roderick Johnson or Jerron Christian. I mean, they're the only two guys that can do it on this roster currently. And I am not convinced that one of them does it. I am not convinced that there isn't an acquisition of some kind, either via trade or via cut down. There are a couple of candidates I think that are viable for trade here. We'll talk about them in the third segment coming up later, folks. But I do think that just like Brett Veach does every year, he'll take the input from the coaching staff and what they've seen, what they've decided their evaluation is in the preseason, and he will act accordingly. And that will be scouring everything he can scour for possibilities at offensive tackle, and hopefully he finds one.
Yeah, could be looking at other positions as well. D-end is another one that I think that you'd be looking at trying to add. Maybe tight end with Blake Bell. We have no idea what's going to happen there either.
Yeah, I mean, hey, there's a lot that could come into it, and they need insurance for what's there for Wiley and Orlando. I mean, Orlando looks great. I think we've been happy with his feet the whole time, but you still got to have some kind of backup just in case. And there's a just in case scenario, an insurance scenario that you guys need to know about as well, because hey, everybody tries to do cool things when they get engaged or they do something special or you're giving your wife something. I had to include a dog in mine, and that was iffy, but I didn't try to like row a boat with it. I didn't try to jump in an open helicopter with a wedding ring or an engagement ring. And there's a lot of scenarios that can go very terribly wrong, but it can help to maybe have some backup for that. And you don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. You certainly don't want it splattered all over the internet, which sometimes those things happen when you let people know about it and family members film things, and that goes crazy. But the guys at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance will make sure that you get a replacement at the full value of that ring, no matter the lost or stolen, or you just can't find out what happened to it. Go to brite.co/locked on. It's the fastest and easiest and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. My wife even needs some of that just because we go sailing in the summers and she likes to wear rings that end up at the bottom of lakes. So those of you who know the area around Wyoming and Nebraska, you might find something really special. So check out BriteCo.co/locked on. Okay. So me and Matt covered a number of guys that maybe have a chance to change their futures. And that's how I'm billing this. This is like the last chance you kind of thing for this year's 45th through 69th guy, right? Because I am counting the practice squad.
Yeah, and I will say this really quick. I am not so sure that they're not already closer to 48 or 49.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially when
I just think that they figured out some of those positions already. The people have just differentiated themselves enough. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there are those guys. There are those other four, and then there are 16 on the practice squad that we'll have to talk about. And I wouldn't be shocked if there's a couple on the practice squad that aren't even from Kansas City. So that'll be something to watch when we eventually get there in the coming days.
Tanner Connor, I'm just saying. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Tell us who you really want, Ryan.
Hey, I want Jeff Stearns and Tanner Connor there. It's that simple. Veach, make it happen. What would Veach do? I hope that we see that coming. But there are guys that are still in battles right now, and I want to start on the defensive side. I know you're totally shocked about that, Chris. The
Flabbergasted.
Right? The battle between Jermaine Carter, Darius Harris, Mike Rose, Jack Cochran. Because I think Elijah Lee and Chanel are just might as well be in with Willie Gay and Nick Bolton. They're on the roster. It's not much of a question. Do they keep 5? Do they keep 6? There's 4 guys for whatever those spots become. And right now, I know it seems crazy, but I lean towards Darius Harris because of his experience, because Tobe trusts him, and because they let him run the middle in like a Tampa 2 last week that I actually didn't think he was capable of. So like it seems like he's taken an incremental step and at least shown a little bit more athleticism at that spot. And I think they need depth and backups at the linebacker spot.
Yeah, and the big question is going to be, can they get one of those guys on the practice squad? And I think that they probably can. I do think that they'll be looking at only keeping 5 linebackers. And I know we're talking linebackers, but really I think what that position is going to come down to is how many they are going to keep is based on how many they keep at the defensive end and defensive tackle position, which we can talk about in a minute. But I think that's really going to affect how many they can keep at linebacker, because if they have to keep 5 and 5 or, even maybe 4 and 5 is going to cause some issues. And offensive line is another position where you're sitting there going, are they going to keep 9 or are they going to keep 10? Lots of different questions there. getting back to linebacker, though, you start looking at what Darius Harris has done. I agree with you. I think he's probably the guy that is in line to be that fifth guy right now. Carter has not differentiated himself on this roster, and you're absolutely right. Chanel's going to be on this roster. Lee is going to be on this roster. We already know that. So you're looking at who's going to be that fifth guy. I think it's Darius Harris as of this moment, but one game can change it all.
Yeah.
If they see something from Carter that they haven't seen, or they see something from Harris that they are worried about, maybe that changes. I really don't think Cochran or Rose really have a chance after the way they played in the preseason. I'm not saying they played horrible, but they haven't differentiated themselves enough to be that guy. And I think that's the problem for him.
I agree. And I think the transition's been tough. Mike Rose has a lot of instinctual and playmaking ability. He showed that in college. I think a stint on the practice squad could help him maybe realize some of that potential. I'd like to see that happen. I don't know if it will, but like you said, the defensive end spot is even more difficult because go ahead.
I just have to say really quick, there's an outside chance. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would say that there's also an outside chance that Kansas City maybe only goes with 4 linebackers and they put 2 people on the practice squad. I don't think that that's reality, but I give it a 5% chance just because roster positions are going to be so hard this year. And maybe they think they can find somebody else to fill that position better than what Harris or Carter could do in cutdowns.
Yeah, that's fair, but that'd make me nervous. But it would let you keep more DNs, and I think that's the part that maybe they need right now. There are some, I think, intriguing cases to be made, but it's very clear that Mike Dana, Carlos Dunlop, George Karlaftis, and Frank Clark are the top 4. Beyond that, it's a little bit murky. And I feel like for me, Herring has taken that number 5 spot. I don't need to see a whole lot more at this point. He needs to sit back, learn, continue down that road. I mean, Josh Kano's an investment. You have a draft pick in him, so I can understand that maybe they want to keep 6 just to see what comes of it. I like Kamara, obviously a KU guy that I think has looked good at times in the preseason. You want to give him a shot at the practice squad, in my opinion, to see what he can develop into. He's got some experience around the league, at least a couple of games, not much statistical effort, but I think he still has upside in him as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be the big question as to how they're going to go in this direction. Last year, everybody thought they should keep Tim Ward, and they went another direction. And so the question this year is, are they going to continue to go with Kando, or are they going to be looking at Herring? They're going to have to keep 5. I can't see them going any lower than 5, especially with Dunlap's injury history. But that also brings me to the other question of, is there going to be another DN that could possibly be released in the next 2 weeks that this team could go after? And then both of those guys are going to be coming off the roster.
Could be. I mean, Trey Flowers is visiting with someone today. If that doesn't work out, I mean, there could be like the late edition, the week 1 edition that a lot of the veterans get because their contract currently, you don't want to guarantee that, especially if you're talking about a 1-year guy that's maybe older, that maybe has injury history. So I don't know that we'll know until we start to look at the practice for the Chargers. Unfortunately, with the way that the schedule is going to roll out, I don't know that could even be applicable.
Yeah, it's hard to know if that could or not. I will say this really quick, though, and I just want to touch on this before we take another quick break. But 4 defensive tackles or 5, in your opinion?
5. Got to have 5.
Okay. So that makes it harder to keep more linebackers. So, yeah. I mean, you're in a position where at that point it's going to be really hard.
It's 5-5-5 for me in the front. I think that's the way you got to do it, because I got to have 10 DBs.
No, I get it. And then you're sitting there. I mean, it's just a lot of people.
It's the 5-5-5-6-4 defense this year, and I'm looking forward to it. Folks, we're going to take a stab at who has like the flyer shots and who might look good to another team. We'll get to that right after this. Now, there are a couple of guys that have made a little noise here, made a play there, something like that. Cordell Powell comes to mind, somebody that could have a fantabulous 3rd preseason game and get themselves at least back into the conversation. I don't know that Powell himself can actually make the roster over Watson and Fountain, but do you see anybody that could have a shot with a great 3rd preseason game?
No, not the wide receiver position, not that position. Looking elsewhere, Caliendo, maybe.
Yeah.
Just because they're looking at trying to figure out how they're going to do their depth at offensive line. And so maybe he's a guy that can somehow force his way in there because he can play multiple positions, and that's extremely valuable. You start looking at tight end, you're not going to have anybody other than the top three, and then Blake Bell's a question mark.
Not really.
QB, what was that?
He's not a question mark in my mind. With the nature of the injury and the fact that he's already had it surgically repaired, I don't see how he can come back without going to IR, at least short term.
No, and I understand that, but that's the question of they're not going to be keeping Bushman. They're not going to be keeping
right.
Franks. Yeah. So I don't think either of those guys have a chance at this point. And so the other thing with Bell is if they want him on IR short term, he has to be on the roster. He has to be on the cut roster. So that's going to cause them to cut somebody else on top of that. Running back wise, I don't think you're looking at Taylor Fleet as being a guy that can stick around. QB Buechele, maybe they keep him. I don't see that they go 3 QBs this year. No. Personally, I just haven't seen it. You flip over to the defensive side, and then you start getting into where the real roster battles are, and that's going to be at corner.
Mm-hmm. I think they're still planning on Fenton. It sounds like Fenton's not a serious injury, so you got to count him amongst the guys that are there. It is both. They're going to have 3 of 6 corners are going to be rookies on this roster. I'm convinced of it, with Jalen Watson playing well enough to make that. The question for me becomes is, do you have Najee Johnson, a 4th rookie, on that list? Do you have DiCaprio Bootle, who's in his 3rd season now? I mean, that's still pretty young. That's still pretty raw. It's going to be a group that, again, I know this sounds crazy, but with the failure of the Lonnie Johnson trade, they could be on veteran watch at the corner spot as well.
They could be. I don't think that they're going to go that direction. I think that they want to bring in these young guys and they wanted to get them to play. And it's going to be they'd be very hard pressed to bring in somebody and have them start week 1 or week 2.
Oh, I don't mean start.
I would think. Huh?
I don't mean start. I meant as a backup.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, maybe, possibly, I guess, but they would be very hard pressed unless there's just some superstar that drops that is available, which I just don't see happening at that position. So I think that you're going to be looking at the guys that you already have on the roster, and those are going to be the guys you're going to go in to this season with. And you're right. The question is it going to be Bootle or is it going to be Johnson? Is it going to be are they going to keep 6? I would think that they're going to. Is Lamon's somehow going, or Lamont's somehow going to make the roster? Don't know.
I don't know either.
He did last year just because of special teams, because they were afraid they'd lose him.
Right.
I don't know that I see that this year, but it wouldn't shock me considering. Think about this, and this is actually really going to play into it. Think about how many core special teams guys they lost this last offseason.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And if he beats out both Johnson and Bootle, okay, I guess you can make that do. The off-the-field thing, I think, is a concern just for character-wise, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be unavailable this season, much as they feel that Kamara's court dates are going to slide past the season. That is something that I think goes into the equation, but I don't think it's something that would keep him off the roster.
Right. So that's the question, and I think that's the other thing that we really haven't talked about enough is how much special teams is going to play into these 5 spots that we're talking about. And even when you start talking about offensive line, that's going to play into it as well. Can they block for, those different types of plays? Are they going to be a guy that's going to go in there and be a cog that they can stick in for field goals and extra points and do that kind of thing? And can they cover kicks? And even as offensive linemen, I mean, you have some bigger guys out there, not always, but sometimes. So how much can you give this team and how are you going to be able to do it? Because the reality is that you only have so many positions and you don't want your guys that you're going to be counting on to be your big players having to go out there on special teams and possibly losing them.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. So there's one other way that you can kind of bolster them. That's to make a late trade, much like we saw a few years ago to get Travarius Ward onto this roster. So I do feel there are a couple of guys that could garner some interest. I think the safety spots have pretty much leveled out, but Zane Anderson played some snaps for this team last season. Maybe he's got a little bit of value. A 7th. I mean, you're not going to get much more than that in general, just on a cut down weak trade. But the guy that stands out to me is Rojo. Do you think that there's any reason to think that he has value outside of Kansas City.
Not with that contract, for one, and two, with Gore going on IR, I don't think that they're going to be looking to move him.
Yeah, okay.
I think with Gore on IR, I think he's going to stick around, and maybe they're going to guarantee him. I mean, it's only $1.5 million. I think he's guaranteed. He's got incentives that he could hit, but if he's hitting his incentives, I think you're going to be happy to pay him. So, to me, I think that he's probably on the roster because of the Gore injury at this point, unless they decide to go only 3 running backs, which they haven't done for a very long time.
I agree. I still feel like there could be another acquisition out there off the waiver wire that might be better for it. Heck, I'll come in and run for you, Andy. I'll take 1.2. That's all I need.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you would be gone after the first game, but that's okay. Appreciate the honest effort there and the desire to try to do that. But I think that you look at what Rojo has brought to this team so far, and if it wasn't for the Gore injury, I don't think he'd have a chance of making the roster, quite honestly. Yeah. And at this point, because of that, I don't think that there's going to be value.
Yeah, that's fair. I just don't think I don't think he's done anything to deserve to make it. So I'd rather see them take a chance on another young waiver casualty than.
And I'd be happy with that. But I think he's on the 53 to begin with, at least. Fair enough.
Okay.
Unless maybe he's the guy that they decide to cut and keep Blake Bell on the roster, and maybe they bring him back for a cheaper amount. I mean, he's already guaranteed the 1.5, so or maybe they just decide to go another direction. They cut him the day after. I agree with you. I don't think he's done enough to be on this roster. I just don't see how they're going to go with 3 running backs into the season unless they're able to get somebody else from somewhere. Fair enough. Obviously, there's always going to be guys that are available on waivers, and but Kansas City's going to be picking so far down, it'd have to be somebody else that nobody else would want. So good luck finding who you're really going to want there.
Yeah, I will say this too: the aforementioned draft picks in Cornell Powell and Josh Kando, they're the other guys that might still have enough value that you could get a pick for them, or you could get another low-level player that isn't going to make somebody else's roster because of their roster crunch, so there's still a few other possibilities.
I think the big key positions for me to look for, and this is where if I was Brett Veach, I'd be looking at swing tackle and I'd be looking at the end. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody at those positions that you think is going to get cut from any of these other teams that you can go out and get? And honestly, I'll say this, we talked about it before. I'd go take the tackle from Chicago. Go take Jenkins.
Yeah.
He's on a rookie contract, and if they don't want him, give him a later round pick and go pick up the tackle from Chicago and see if you can work with him. It's better than what you have on the roster, and I would at least think that he would be able to step in and be that swing guy in at least a limited capacity early on.
Agreed. It's all whether Poles and Veach can come to an agreement is my guess. But,
well, and the other side on that is I still think he has the ability to play right tackle in this league. Now, whether or not Kennard ever can, we haven't seen it from him yet. I don't think that means that he has to be on the roster long term. 5th round pick. I mean, you have to just figure if he pans out, he pans out. If he doesn't, he doesn't.
He gets his pads out, he'll have a guard.
Right? Yeah, but Kansas City set at guard for at least the next 2 seasons.
Yeah. Maybe you have to keep something in your pocket for the future. We'll talk about that after this last preseason game, folks. See who steps up, see who does something. We will have reaction for you after the game. We'll have our normal Sunday show as always. So thanks for being with us today. Let us know who you're looking for in the comments on YouTube and in the reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We appreciate your time. Get ready for this game. Enjoy it while it's here. We'll talk to you next time.